So I will now introduce our speaker. We have Anthony Lardaro. He is class of 2003 and 2004. He has a bachelor's in journalism, followed by a master's in secondary education. Anthony began his career with 2 years of teaching as a history teacher for New Jersey public schools before entering the financial services industry, where he spent 10 years with both Prudential and MetLife as a strategic communications business partner. Anthony has now been at Johnson & Johnson for 4 years, where he is currently the Senior Manager of Education and Development, where he delivers learning programs to the healthcare's largest supply chain, world's largest supply chain. And my favorite fun fact about Anthony is he is part of our Alumni Association board. So he is a member. We get to work with him throughout the year on alumni initiatives and volunteer opportunities such as this. Anthony also volunteered for our leadership program this past year with our students. So I just want to give a big thank you to him for always devoting time and talent to our college. He's a great advocate, and we're really lucky to have him as a part of the Alumni Association board. So I will now turn it over to him to begin the presentation, and thanks again, Anthony.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, how are we looking, Pam? We're good?
It looks like you were on the question slide, which I believe comes at the end.
I am, yes. Forgive me here. Everyone gets a preview of where we're going to end today. There we go. Okay, wonderful.
All good.
All right, thank you, Pam, for the introduction. Hello, alumni. I'm delighted to be here today with my fellow alumni. Interviewing, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. There's just several reasons why. It's something that I have a lot of experience in, and obviously that's what I want to share with you today. But it's something that I have come to learn that some people think is exactly the opposite of that it's unlearnable. And when we think about when we get the job that we want, that we think it's because so-and-so got the job because they knew someone who knew someone, or they memorized all the answers to all the possible questions. And yeah, both of those things happen, especially about knowing someone who knows someone. And I'm certain you've seen it, maybe you've experienced it, but my goal today instead is to try to take you away from that thinking. And I want to show to you, and hopefully you'll see it, that there is more that you can control during the interview process, maybe than you think. And it's not about, you're going to hear me say this a lot, it is not about knowing everything. You don't have to know everything in your field. Interviewing is a test of character and what kind of person, what kind of leader are you? So my goal today is to show you where to shift your energy, where to devote your time to help you stand out from the people who, in my experience, are often focused on the wrong things when they're trying to interview. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about me. Pam gave you the specifics, but I'll tell you a little bit more first. I think it's relevant, my career experience here, because everything I'm about to share with you is based on my own personal experience. So what you're not going to see is captions and footnotes about this academic research and that's important, but that's not my style here today. There are also all those resources out there. There's tons of them, and we're all very capable of researching them on our own. And I don't want to waste your time just repackaging and regurgitating that. So what I want to do instead is give you a perspective of someone who has lived it for a number of years on both sides of what is now the virtual interviewing table. And you also all have various levels of experience in interviewing that I want you to think about today and take my advice and make it your own. I also want to acknowledge the obvious by my shameless selfie there, demonstrating good behavior, I think. I hope everyone is doing their part right now. I hope everyone is healthy. I hope everyone is safe. And the way I'm looking at today and everything that's happened over the last 2 months especially is I'm using this very sad, very tragic moment, very difficult moment in world history for me to give something back to you, my alumni peers, and to the College of New Jersey, something that I have a lifelong relationship with and continue will. Well, speaking of which, as Pam mentioned, my current relationship with TCNJ is I am on, you are all, I should say, on the members of the Alumni Association. I hope, and I am fairly certain, that you have seen invitations to various events that we're hosting all over the country. Again, when things get back to normal, we're going to hopefully get back to that routine. We are doing things like starting regional chapters in Philly and DC, and maybe looking to expand our presence out to the West Coast. But I don't want to give too much of a plug here, just a little bit of a plug. But when all this is over, and it will be over, come out, see us, have some fun. We'd love to see you. The other reason why I'm bringing up my position with the Alumni Association Board is that was my most recent interview. This is a volunteer gig, but it was an interview nonetheless. And everything that I'm about to show you, I acted on less than a year ago. It was last summer when I interviewed for this position. So I have confidence that you can take everything I'm about to give you. This is kind of my own personal playbook. Think about it, and then, as I said before, make it your own. All right, the big word, confidence. We're going to touch the head. We're going to touch the heart today. My goal is to make you leave here with the confidence that you're going to think about that chasm, that leap between job application to job offer. You're going to have the confidence that you can make that leap if you focus on the right things, like so many people often don't during this process. I want to show you how to navigate all of that and just how to cut out the noise, because there is a lot of noise and there's lots of distractions and lots of intimidating factors. And I start with this word confidence, and I'm really going to emphasize it as we go on. Something that stuck with me a number of years ago in my career when I was at Prudential. We were gathered in a room, it was a town hall or something, with one of the most senior folks in our US business anyway. And he had this commentary on comfort. He said, we always strive for comfort. We're not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with that. Are you comfortable with this? And he said, no, let's not be comfortable. Let's strive for confidence. Let's make sure that we are investing our resources and working towards the right outcomes, and think less about how we feel internally. Let's be confident with our decisions. So today we're going to instill confidence in your interviewing skills. All right, I'm going to pause here, let you drink this in. I'm going to literally take a drink. Okay. This, by the way, is what I call the before time. I miss restaurants. I hope you do too. I miss movie theaters. I miss all that. I digress. We'll get that back there one day. Here's what I think is an original idea. If it's not, let me know. But this dawned upon me a couple of years ago. Interviewing, to me, is a lot like dating. So just bear with me here. Let me tell you what's on my mind here. It's a really awkward encounter between two people trying to get to know each other. Maybe they read about you online, because we did our research, and maybe someone put in a good word for you, that you can rely and count on this person. This is a good person, and you both have questions for each other. You're hoping that when you meet, you get answers to those questions, and if everything went well, we know what we're going to do. We're going to check our phone over and over and over again at the next couple of days, and you want good news, you want to see a yes, but if it's a no, then let's just get it over with. Don't keep me in agony here. And either the next step happens or the next step doesn't happen. So I'm making that comparison. I am showing you this, sharing this metaphor, because it's hopefully something that you can relate to and think about interviewing in a different way. When I think about the energy that we focus in general, anytime we're trying to make a first impression, those skills are transferable to the world of interviewing. So just keep that in mind as we move on. All right. So the theme here is I'm going to take what I know, again, this is my personal experience about interviewing, and I'm going to condense it to 3 positive behaviors I think we can all showcase, 3 things that are going to set you up for success. And also for those of you, I want to acknowledge, all of us have been interviewed, but I'm sure many of you interview candidates yourself. And I'd really like to hear what you think about this when we get to the Q&A. I'm really ready for discussion. So also when you conduct interviews, if there are things that you can take from this as someone on the other side of the table, by all means, I hope you can take that away as well. First expectation of a candidate. I want to see a candidate be prepared. we're going to talk a lot about this today. This is your homework. You have to do homework about the job and about the organization that you're interviewing with, but you have to do some homework about yourself. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of an exercise about that later. To me, often when someone asks me why I did not recommend that a candidate move from this phase to the next phase, I will very often say it was very obvious that the candidate was not prepared. There's lots of ways someone can come across as unprepared to me. So preparation, key. Next expectation, I want to see a candidate is authentic. Authentic means you're genuine. You are coming across as your own true self, that you are not, and I've seen people fall into this trap, that you're not trying to pretend to be something that you aren't. Because if you're trying to be what the job wants you to be, and that's not who you are, then how can I say that you're the right person for the job? I want to give you an example, an anecdote from something earlier in my career. When I was interviewing for my first job at MetLife, and this was when I was going from middle school history teacher to the corporate world, biggest career leap to this day I've still ever had. When I was interviewing for the job, it came up in the course of the conversation. It was not posted in the job description that knowing Microsoft Access was going to be a very valuable skill to know on the job. And the person interviewing me, he ended up being my boss. Today, he's still a friend and mentor, I consider. He asked me just straight up, do you know Microsoft Access? So I gave a very honest answer, and I said, no, I don't. But I know things like Excel, and I think I could pick up Access pretty quickly because I'm fairly tech savvy. And then we moved on. Now later, a couple months later maybe, he told me that that was probably the most honest answer that he ever got to that question, because he did bring it up in basically every interview for a job that was similar to the one that I ended up getting. The answer that he usually got was not a form of no that I gave him, but yes. Because as he probed further, and the reason why he didn't like that yes answer was it became very clear that they didn't know what they said they know. And these are his words, not mine. He says, as far as I'm concerned, when they say that they said that they knew Microsoft Access, all they did was double click the icon, open the application, and then close it. Okay, it was very obvious to him. That's the lesson. If you fall into this trap, it's going to be very obvious that you're trying to pass yourself along as something that you're not. A good interviewer, and I think I'm pretty savvy about this, and I could catch up, I can catch these mistakes, is going to see right through it. I'll just give you an example. If you are trying to come across as a very tough, firm person, and that's not who you are, you're going to come across as arrogant. Don't do that. Instead, I want you to talk to me about how you can influence people instead. If you've never used Microsoft Access before, do not say that you've used Microsoft Access. Okay? Don't be what the job wants you to be. Be yourself. And last, a good candidate is self-aware. What do I mean here? It means a couple of things. One, that you have demonstrated, and again, this is the exercise we're going to do, that you've demonstrated that you are in touch with who you are as a person and as a professional, and that you know where you have worth and where you have value, right? Self-awareness is also the ability to read the room, I like to say, to know how to relate to different personalities within the interview process. So for example, are you emotive, as I like to say? Do you smile when the interviewer makes a lighthearted comment? Do you say things like, wow, that's interesting, tell me more? Are you relating? Are you conversing? Are you showing personality and adapting to the conversation? Okay, so talking about personalities, that's actually a really good segue to what we're going to talk about next. All right. If you can take one thing away from our time together today, I recommend that you focus on this. What do interviewers look for? If you have performed interviews, you know that, and I actually really enjoyed being part of this process. It is a very highly collaborative process behind the scenes because you have to gather that panel of expert, that team of people who are going to serve on this interviewing panel or committee, whatever you want to call it. And you have to articulate to each other what skills you're both looking for in a candidate to fill the role, and are they a cultural fit, and so on and so forth. So I want to break this down and give you maybe a different perspective on what you have thought about in the past about interviewing, to think about the personalities that you encounter and less so the process and the memorization of certain things. So generally speaking, the way I look at it is, there's 4 types of interviewers that you're going to encounter. You have a screening with a recruiter or something equivalent of that. I'll explain what I mean. You have an interview with the hiring manager, an interview with a peer, and an interview with what I call the stakeholder. Now, also want to put out there, you're probably already thinking about this now as you're looking at this, all of this varies greatly by the size of your employer and by the profession and other factors. So what I'm about to explain, it may seem unfamiliar, it may seem irrelevant. It could be any of those things. Some of these interviews, they get combined into one session. Maybe it's a peer and a stakeholder at the same time. Some of these are one-to-one. Sometimes you're in a group interview with 2 other candidates. That's okay. This is a guide, and I think we're all capable of extrapolating and reassembling this based on what our own interview experience is. So the key here is focus on the personalities that I'm sharing and less about how less about the structure of the process, because it is going to vary. All right. First, the recruiter, screener, or equivalent of that. Smaller organizations, the reason why I say equivalent is smaller organizations and companies, they may not have dedicated recruiters. I have usually worked with one because I basically worked in medium to large companies for my whole career. The recruiter's job, or that equivalent person, is to make sure, this is going to sound like a little hard to swallow, but I think we all know this, it's to make sure that you are worth going through this process, that you are worth the rest of the interviewer's time. So a good recruiter or equivalent is going to want to know, can you describe your skills and your experience clearly, concisely, and with confidence? At the same time, indirectly, I don't know if you've ever picked up on this, this is the early way that you showcase your ability to communicate and relate to others. So use it as a chance to demonstrate who you are, your sociability skills. Next, did you do your homework? We're going to talk about homework here. Did you do your homework about the organization? Do you know the profession in general? I want to see if you have that baseline level of knowledge. And really important here, if you don't convey your enthusiasm and excitement for the role, the recruiter is going to pick up on that. More often than not, when a candidate doesn't make the cut from the recruiter screening, what I hear more often than not is that the candidate just did not have energy, did not have excitement, more often than they didn't have the qualifications. That happens too, but it's mostly about energy. And more importantly here, this screening step almost always happens virtually. And if it's just over the phone, or maybe now obviously we're using face-to-face virtual meeting tools a lot more, but if it's just over the phone, you have to convey that enthusiasm with your voice only without the benefit of body language. And that is really hard. So that's something to work at, keep in mind. All right, next, the hiring manager interview. And this is who we usually think about during the process, but all I want to know as a hiring manager is, if we could boil it down just to a theme, do you care? You care about the job, you care about people. If you don't like the work, you're not going to do it well. If you don't have the capacity or demonstrate the capacity to learn and to develop and grow, you're not going to come across as teachable, as coachable. For any of you who are managers, you know that a big part of your job is developing your talent. And if you hire someone who doesn't have the willingness to learn, then we're not investing in the right people. As a candidate, I gave a version of this presentation to TC&J seniors yesterday, and I wonder if it was the first time that they heard it, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. You do not have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert. It's more important that you demonstrate that, yes, you have the right skills, but you have demonstrated your capacity to learn, because we can teach you many things on the job. Also, do you fit the culture? There's a woman who's the head of my department, a woman named Liz, friend and a mentor, known her for 4 years now. She's told me something, and the rest of my department a long time ago. It's good advice. However you conduct yourselves at work, do not leave a trail of dead bodies. I've seen it. We all know people who act that way. I have, in an interviewing context, I have interviewed what I call a couple of wild cards in my day. There was one person at J&J that I'm thinking of. He was just not going to be a cultural fit. It's about 2 years ago, and he did not move on further into the process. So what else? Manager also wants to know, what kind of supervision do you need? Do I have to be hands-on with you if you're a more junior employee, or do you like to find your own path and go? Obviously, the latter is more desirable, but we have to be honest about that. And manager wants to know, do you have influencing skills? Every job requires influencing skills. And the way I look at it is to show people a better path and to bring them along for the ride. And I, as a manager, I want to know if you know how to build those relationships and get things done without me giving explicit direction to you. And often that comes in the form of knowing how to influence people. Okay, the peer interview. I love being a peer interview. I'm sure many of you have. I like it because I get to show the candidate what the job really looks like. And quite often, we know what the job is like better than the hiring managers does. And I also get to shape my own team, my own environment. It's great to be a part of that. And I hope if you've been a part of that, you agree with that. As a peer interviewer, I want to know, are you pleasant to work with? Am I going to like working with you? Are you trustworthy? Can I count on you? Are you going to make us better? What can you do that I can't do? And again, if you have been in this role, you know that the peer interview input is a huge input into the final decision. So if you are chosen for this role, don't take it lightly. I certainly don't. Last, the stakeholder interview. These are your internal customers. Everybody has internal customers. Now, in my experience, they have to like you. It's personal, it's emotional, but I think it's true. They have to like you. Your job is to serve them. And if you can't demonstrate that you can make their lives and their jobs easier and do it in a pleasant way, they don't need you and they're going to move on without you. So this person is going to want to know, are you reliable? Can you execute? Can I count on you? And importantly, and this is something that I'm still working on as a professional, can you and will you anticipate my needs? As we go higher in the organization, we expect very capable people to figure out and find problems before others are even aware of it, to proactively find a solution to that. So stepping back here, this is the key. If you take away one thing today, I hope that it's this. Study and reflect on the personalities of these folks. Reflect also if you've been in these roles, and again, tell me during Q&A if you have something to add or to disagree. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But I personally have found extraordinary success telling my story to these different people along the way and making my authentic, there's that word again, authentic true self come through. All right, here's another way to look at it. This is also what I want to see in general from a candidate come through. So look this over. Especially if you're going to watch the recording, spend some time thinking about this. A lot of these are going to look familiar as well. We're talking about values and behaviors here. Are you a value-based person? These are the qualities that I want to see in a candidate as well. I specifically want to draw your attention to the bottom right there, everyone. VUCA. This is a word that we're using at J&J. We are trying to teach our supply chain leaders to succeed in a VUCA environment. It's a term that actually comes from the military, I believe. But if you can demonstrate and cite examples of where you have and will succeed in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, then I'm going to conclude that you don't respond well to challenging situations. So as you think about your job experience in the next interview and the next time you as an interviewer are going to meet with a candidate, think about those times where you were in these VUCA type of situations and prove that you can do it again. Okay, preparation. I said we were going to talk a lot about this. Earlier, I said this was my interviewing playbook. I prefer that. I don't like the word recipe, but I'm breaking the metaphor here. I don't care. I think you get the point here. This is about getting your act together, doing your homework, and sharing with you my methods to do this. This is what you can control because this is the work that you put in up front. So let's cook, but you do the dishes. I don't like doing the dishes. All right. Preparation starts with self-inventory. Literally, it starts with you. We need to ground ourselves. We need to know our objectives and our goals. And I want to walk you through an exercise that you can do on your own. Start by asking yourself 2 questions. So this to the seniors yesterday. These are deceptively difficult to answer. And if you can't give a very clear, authentic, there's that word again, thoughtful answer to these questions to yourself, and you have to be honest with yourself. I want you to step away, take a breath, try again, go at it again later. All right. Now, take these 2 questions. I'm going to use my job, reflecting on it as an example. I want this job because I want to help others be their best selves at their job and to learn and to grow and to develop. And I want to do it in a company that provides better health to J&J's billion customers all around the world. And I want to learn about supply chain at the same time. All right. I'm qualified for this job because throughout my career, I have excelled at simplifying and articulating complex concepts that are as complex as supply chain to different people from different cultures and of different ages when I think about when I was a teacher and measuring those outcomes. All right. These are hard questions to answer. They're very difficult to confront, but what hopefully you picked up on there is I told a story about who I am, what my goals are, and my values, and how that fits into the context of a job. All right. Strengths and weaknesses. Think about this. I just encourage you to avoid being overly critical, avoid being negative, creates toxicity, demotivates us. But think about think about your skill set. What do you rely on heavily? What do you lean on? And which are the ones that you're working on proactively? And be honest about that. Likes and dislikes. Not money. We like money. I like money. But we're talking about the intangibles here. Interviewers like me want to know, this is about what motivates you, what demotivates you. Take myself as an example again. I like working with really smart people who are going to teach me things and who are going to pick me up when my spirits are down and have fun along the way. Maybe have a few laughs at the same time. I also like recognition. I like being recognized publicly, especially. I often like to say a pat on the back actually goes a pretty long way with me. I want to know, by thinking about likes and dislikes, essentially I want to know what you're going to jump on and what you're going to procrastinate on. So for example, I dislike when, I often like to say, ready, fire, aim. I don't like when we do a good job of planning for what we have to do. I dislike when we're doing things the way that we've always done it because it's the way that we've always done it. I always like to think, going back to influencing, that there's a better path, and I like showing people the better path and bringing them along for the ride. Notice there with those dislikes, I still went about and I reframed them to something positive, influencing and planning and so forth. So even with those dislikes, find the positive within there. And last, this is a huge topic that we could have a whole other webinar about this, the link to our overall careers and career planning. But I'll just leave you with this bit of advice to think about as we go forward. That old saying is true, that is the job you're applying for how's it going to get you to the next job and the next job after that? Just put a pin in that. It's something that responsible people in their careers always think about. And I'm only bringing it up because just for today, as we go on, but just put it in the context of interviewers want to make sure that you are thinking long-term and that they're investing in people when they hire them and investing in them for the long term. All right, more about homework. Now we're talking about homework about the employer. I put it in bold. Sometimes I can't believe I have to remind people about this, but I'm dead serious. Read the job description several times over. It is blatantly obvious. I have seen this many times when a candidate has not read the job description since they submitted the application. Maybe they barely skimmed it. They looked at the job title and they haven't even thought about it since. I'm going to give you an example of what it really means to look at a job description quickly in just a moment. You have to learn about the company. I'm sure we all do this, but I'll give you an anecdote not so much an anecdote, but an example to think about. If you're applying for a job at J&J, and you're interviewing with me and it comes up in conversation, if you don't know that we're working on a vaccine for COVID-19, I'm sorry you blew it. The interview is over. I'm not saying this because I want you to awkwardly trying to shove it into the conversation, but you have to be aware of it in case it comes up. Let's see, names of key people. Probably illustrate this through an example. If you saw on my my career path between MetLife and Prudential, I worked at a small financial company called Foresters for 2 years. And when I was interviewing with the head of HR, she would become my boss. We got to talking about the CEO, company of about 1,000 people. So it was someone I was going to be interacting with. And I reacted to one of her comments by calling the CEO by his name. And not that big of a deal. It wasn't overly forced, but it was just a subtle indicator that, yeah, I did my homework and that I humanized someone, arguably the most important person in the company. I didn't refer to him as the CEO, like called him by his name, Chris Pinkerton. It was a little subtle hint there. What else? Names. Speaking of names, always get the names and positions of the people that you are interviewing in. This is going to help you in a couple of ways, but really it helps you prepare and give you a chance to ask the interviewers at the end of the session their opinions of the organization. I'm going to come back to that at the end. As I said to the seniors yesterday, I'll say this again. Internet stalking when it comes to job exploration is acceptable. Because fair is fair, I'm going to look you up on social media. I'm particularly going to look you up on LinkedIn. I'm going to look you up everywhere. The LinkedIn example, by the way, I am particularly interested in that because I want to make sure that the resume you submitted matches the reality that you are expressing to the world on your LinkedIn profile. And let me tell you, I have seen discrepancies in my career. I'm sure you have too. Okay, finally, people who work there, I am not talking about nepotism. Yes, it happens. Networking also, I'll be honest guys, is not my strength. I'll be really honest about that. But if you're the type of person who finds a lot of success, and lots of people do, to have someone put in a good word for you, trust your judgment there. I totally trust your judgment there. But think about when you have the luxury of this type of person, think about other types of questions that you could ask. So I often like to ask about what's the culture? Do you know anything about the company I'm applying to? Maybe do you know the hiring manager? That's fair game. My favorite question to ask is, would you take this job? And short story here, when I was interviewing for my job at Prudential, I knew one person, was a friend from high school who worked there. And I asked him that question and he said, if I had that background and experience, yeah, I would. He did something different, but he was honest with me there. So that question and just talking to that person in general, it's going to give you that just a little extra boost of, there's the word again, confidence. It's going to give you that extra boost of confidence. All right. I said I want to give you an example of looking at a job description. As I said, it's clear when the candidate hasn't looked at the job description in a while. Here's a job description. Here is my job description. This is what I applied for. This is my current role. And it was kind of fun digging this out of my, my files. What you see here in red, this is when I look on it, when I look closely at it, these are the keywords and concepts that I would pull out. Maybe you agree, job descriptions, they are usually terribly, terribly written. They're vague and they're full of jargon, and especially insider jargon that an external candidate is going to have no idea what it means. But regardless, if you read it critically, whether you are an internal or external candidate, there are ideas and concepts that you can pull out to become more informed in the interview. So good piece of advice, find the verbs or the noun-ish versions of verbs like identification, develop, delivery. We all knows what that looks like in verb form. Always write in verbs, always makes it clear. But anyway, what I pull from this is I was going to be responsible for the whole picture, a learning and development function from end to end, the whole thing. Supply chain, many, many, many references to supply chain in this job description. I better brush up on what is supply chain. At the time, I knew virtually nothing about it. How to do my homework there. 5 segments in J&J. Here's some J&J insider talk. I don't like that this got shown to the outside world, to a candidate. I don't think it was very fair. It made sense to me when it was posted internally, but when we talk about 5 seconds within J&J, we're talking about internally what how we structure our 5 lines of business: pharmaceuticals, consumer, surgical, orthopedics, and vision care. The reason why this is tricky is because if you did your research about J&J on our website, you would see not 5 segments, you would say we have 3 business sectors. Not really fair to the candidate. So in the interview, it's a fair question to ask. Is it 5? Is it 3? Tell me more about the company. Okay. Competency gaps, something that I need to know for learning development profession. What is the difference between a competency, a capability, and a skill? They mean very different things. I better brush up on that. 21st century learning modalities. I joke with my current boss, we're 20 years into the 21st century. Why are we still struggling with this? We are. But in any event, what we're talking about here in the profession is things that are more engaging than classroom type training, whether that's face-to-face or virtual. So things that I work on, things like simulations, micro-learning, so on and so forth. So I had to study up on what those techniques were, learning modalities. And lastly, this one kind of stands out to me. Leadership development happens to be a huge part of J&J culture. It's related to my job. And when you read the job description, this idea of leadership development communities is kind of tangential to the job description. And I would want to know, what is it about these communities? How does it intersect with the job? So my message here, take a critical look at the job description. Yes, they're usually terribly written, but read it closely and you can definitely pull out some useful information. All right. Let's start preparing for questions. Again, I did a version of this for the seniors yesterday, and I shared with them some questions where beginners stumble, but I want to share with you some questions where I see even the most experienced candidates stumble. Hopefully these look a little bit familiar. When I'm interviewing, I always ask, tell me about yourself. This is where I start to read you. I start to get a sense of who you are as a person. I don't want you to recite your resume. I read your resume. I'm going to ask you what you accomplished later. Instead, I want you to tell me about your strengths, what you like to do, and who you are as a human being. Talking about your coworkers, talking about your last job. Bring it back to those honest assessments of yourself that we did in the self-inventory. Bring it back to the positives in people that you know and that you've worked with, and always tell me what you learned along the way. Motivators, again, bring it back to people. Also remember that when we talked about what we liked when we did our self-inventory, think about that here. Likes are what motivates us to get up and go to work every day. Also, no matter what level of experience people have, I've noticed that everyone struggles with the weaknesses question, but I think I figured out a simple way for everyone to think about this. There's more than one way to approach it, but this is how I considered it. Come up with an authentic, there's a word, an authentic idea for what your manager can teach you. What I don't want to hear, as you can see to the right, is that you don't know how to act like an adult. In fact, everything in that right column, I'm not going to even say it out loud because they're cliche and they're lazy. And if I hear them, you didn't get the job. So maybe you've heard them. I'm sure you have heard them yourselves. Maybe you have said them. I've probably dropped one or two in my career, regretfully, but just go with me on this one. Those are deal breakers. All right, other questions we can prepare for. Again, these will look familiar. I want you to think differently about this though, rather than memorizing questions, because I often, at least to me, deliver them in a form of tell me about a time when. It's more of a conversation, less than an interrogation, which an interview can sometimes become. I want you to reframe that. Tell stories. Think about your examples of your experience. Tell them as stories. So that's a different way to look at questions. And for some of these questions, keep in mind, think about times when things did not go as planned. And that's okay to do that, because as an interviewer, I'm not going to judge you. Maybe I will in my mind quietly, but I'm not going to bring it up in the interview. You should have done it this way. You should have done it that way. Your interviewers are very kind and understanding of those things. I just want to hear what you learned and what you're going to do next time, because you are going to find yourself in these situations again. And I want to know how you're going to respond. I want to spend a moment on one question. Watch out, the one at the bottom there. People that we had a hard time getting along with. Keep in mind, I hope this comes across as common sense. I really do. In fact, I'm sure it is. But just going to put it out there. Never bash someone. Never call them names. Talk about the things that you did and how you made the situation work. All right? Take the emotion out of it. The other thing is, this has never happened. I'm grateful for that. But you never know who knows who. Don't be so specific about this person that you have in mind that the interviewer can identify who that person is. Again, in your career, never know who knows who. Okay, last thing about questions. These are the questions that you get to ask. Some candidates don't come with any questions at all. It's a bad sign. It's a lack of preparedness, and it shows me that you're not really interested in learning. Sometimes I also hear, I don't have any questions. You answered all of my questions during the interview. It happens. I get answers to some of my questions during the interviews, but you got to come extra prepared. 10 questions, 12 questions, things you don't even plan on asking maybe. You could also acknowledge, if the interviewer really did do a good job answering your questions, you could acknowledge that they were helpful in describing the job. But this is why you read the job description. There are always things to pull out that we don't address in the interview. And then there are general questions to ask about the people and to get their honest perspectives on this. These are your future colleagues. This is going to help you figure out, are these the people that you want to work with? And overall, is this the job that's right for you? It's fair game. You can ask them. On the left, these are questions that I personally like to ask. They are not specific to any job description. These are the things that I want to know about my future colleagues. I want to point out the bottom two. why you like working here, challenge the organization is facing. This is why we get the names of the people we are interviewing. This is why we research the company, because we could have a more informed conversation during Q&A. And like the prior slide, everything on the right. If you have asked these in the past, or I have not heard many of these on the other side of the interview table, but every now and then you do. I strongly encourage you to stay away. I will admit though, I have mixed feelings about the last one. When will I hear back from you? That's because the answer is, when I'm interviewing someone, the answer is, I don't know, or 2 weeks, something vague like that. The way I look at it is you kind of have to respect the interview process. I know we have to be patient, but if you are getting really antsy, 2 weeks, it's kind of a rule of thumb. And especially if you're working with a recruiter, go to that person rather than the manager or the peers, because they are delegating that to the recruiter. Okay. All right, starting to wrap up. Thank you everyone for sticking with me. I know I gave you a lot to think about, and a lot of this hopefully sounds familiar as well. And maybe that means I'm validating some things that you already know to be true and effective. That's great. Also, my take on it is, in my experience with sitting in and delivering webinars, they're not going to transform your life. And this is also true of conferences that I go to, if there are just a few bits of wisdom that you can take away from this, then you have learned something. You've taken away something important. But I'm just taking it back to the main ideas at the beginning. If you keep these principles in mind, I promise you, this is the key to setting you up for interview success. Be prepared to talk about yourself, your capacity to learn, your position, that you are being your own true, genuine, authentic self, and that good person that you are is shining through, that you know who you are, you know what you want, you know you're passionate and optimistic for the future and your career, and that you have the capacity to read the room, relate to others, and have a conversation and demonstrate your value. Say it again, you don't have to know everything. Show me you're a smart person, show me a good person, we'll teach you the rest. All right, real fast before I take questions, just some further reading. There's lots of great information out there. We've all done our online research about preparing for interviews. I want to help you narrow it down just a little bit. These are the sources I have found to be the most important. I'm actually a member of the organization at the top, ATD. So many great resources I find on these sites about interviewing skills, but also career advice and workplace competency in general. I bet also many of you are at least aware, or in fact are members of your own professional organization, like I am with ATD. And I am sure that they have advice on what to look for in the right job and how to prepare for it. All right. So now we get to take your questions. Thank everyone for hanging in with me again. Pam, let's see what everyone has to say.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you so much. That was a whole lot of good stuff to think about. So thank you. Again, if you would like to join us live and enable your cameras, we would love to field questions that way. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you are uncomfortable or you're still in your pajamas or you weren't expecting to be live, certainly feel free to use the chat feature as well and submit your questions that way. So if anyone has a question, we do have one in the chat, looks like. And I will also preface the questions by adding that this webinar will be available, a recording of it will be available on the alumni website. So that's alumni.tcnj.edu under the events tab, and you'll see webinars is what you'll click on. And at the bottom of that page will be all of the recordings of the past webinars. I know that's usually a popular question. All right, let's see. We have a question. Is it fair to ask, what is your timeline for filling the position, or where are you at in your process?
Yeah, I think so. Now that I think about it, that is a much fairer way than when am I going to hear back from you, because it shows that you are being thoughtful. Again, I talked about like respecting the process that you're going through. In fact, now that I think about it, I have asked that question. Just think, you're thinking about it holistically. Where are you? And then I could take that information and extrapolate from, okay, this is how I manage my expectations. So I think that's a totally fair point. Thanks for bringing that up.
All right, does anyone have a live question? two screens here, so I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. All right, here's a question. What is the most successful way to close the interview?
To close the interview, I mean, a demonstration of gratitude, obviously, that's common sense. I'll say this. This is something that I wish I had time to touch on, but often the way I close an interview is, again, I could do a whole session on this, bringing sample work if it's something that you can. I know there's also, we have to be worried about from prior jobs, what's confidential, what's proprietary, but there's techniques to get around that. Again, I wish I could talk about that more at length, but oftentimes I end the interview by saying, if there are samples that I am comfortable leaving with the interviewer, I could say, great meeting with you. I want to leave you with some sample work that I have. Take a chance, take some time to go over. If you have any questions, contact me about it. So it's a little something to leave in the interviewer's mind so they remember you. Something like literally tangible that they can hold on to. A thank you. It's not so much an empty statement, but I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to hearing about next steps. It's a signal that, put it to you this way, sometimes an interview can be awkward, even if it goes well. I have interviews that I did move on to the next round and it still felt really awkward. So if you're feeling if you feel like the person interviewing you wasn't feeling you, don't let that demotivate you. Put it out there. If you really still are excited about the job and it was just this one interview that threw you off, you can still you can still put out there, thank you for your time. I look forward to next steps and I hope to hear from you soon. Totally fair to say.
All right, great, thank you. We have a lot of questions, so I have to scroll through here.
Great.
How do you address a candidate who attempt to ramble, who tend to ramble? That may be what it says here. How do you address the candidates who tend to ramble?
Okay, this is where I try to be kind to candidates, and I think we all have to be they're nervous. If someone starts to ramble, I address it in a couple of ways, and I kind of start generally, then I get a little bit more specific. If someone is rambling and they're not quite answering the question, I'll say, can you try that again? I'm not quite sure I followed what you said there. Or then you can get a little bit more specific and say, I didn't understand what you said there. And then if they continue to do it, just take a breath, just think about it more clearly. Try to be a little bit more concise with your answer, because I know you're trying to get at something, but I want you to try to focus on that a little bit more. If you really think that there's something to what the candidate is saying, you can very gently coach them. But what I don't recommend you do is smack them in the face and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Just let them down very gently. Be kind, be empathetic, be understanding, and just let them know as early as you can that they're a little bit off topic or they're not getting to the point. There's ways to do that.
Okay, any tips for virtual or camera interviews?
Virtual interviews are all the principles that I mentioned about preparation definitely comes through, definitely holds true. Authenticity, awareness. The challenge that we have right now for those of you looking for jobs or interviewing other candidates is we're looking at each other through screens like we are right now. And I'll address this from the point of view of someone who is interviewing. I could have spent time on this. I chose not to do this in my presentation, but like just your basic, webcam framing abilities, lighting, things like that. The thing that I've been thinking about lately is the quality of your audio is more important than the quality of your video. Wired earphones, good. Wires work. I have a brother-in-law who works in IT. His tagline is wires work. AirPods are cool. Mine work great, but just wires, play it safe. If the video connection starts to cut out, you can apologize for that. If everything is really starting to go awry, again, people are really understanding in this environment right now. You can say, I'm really having some problems. Can we dial back in? Maybe something like that. I think that is totally fair. Let's see, from the point of view of an interviewer, also make sure that you're demonstrating good practice, that you're not, I don't want to angle my webcam, that your webcam is also not pointed at the ceiling, that you are in a clear space in your home. Watch outside noise. I got my door locked. My cat can't wander in here. Watch your kids. Things of that nature. Just demonstrate good behavior, and that's going to put the candidate at ease also. So if you make the right effort and the candidate makes the right effort, especially given our situation, it should be a breeze.
Very, very relevant right now.
I'm sure that's where the question's coming from.
Okay, when it comes to the interview question regarding weaknesses, what is your opinion on how much information should be provided to the interviewer on this specific topic?
Okay. You do have to go beyond saying what and again, as long as it's a constructive weakness, that I always bring it back to what can the manager coach you on. You have to acknowledge it. You have to put it in a very constructive way. And chances are you're going to say, I take that back. Try to put it in terms of, I wish I were getting better, or I am working on this, rather than I can't do this, or I do this poorly. Put it in a positive. I am working on this. And then give an example of a time where, or an example of both, I should say, an example of how you're working on it, some recent interaction that you had at work where you saw some improvement. And at the same time, how you came to realize that you have that weakness. So I'll tell you my weakness. I don't delegate enough. I'm too hands-on. And I learned this through just constructive feedback from my management. I learned this from realizing that I was spending time on things that I didn't need to do anymore. And I learned to trust my colleagues and recognize that they had skills and it was their job to take this stuff on. And then I talked about how I'm working on it and how I'm continuing to work with my manager and my peers and checking in occasionally and saying, I'm working on this, how am I doing? So there's a very positive and constructive way to go about it, but you do have to go beyond stating what the weakness is and always make sure that you're stating the weakness as something positive that you are working on.
Great, thank you. Okay, would it be better to treat an interviewer as a peer or as a superior?
Treat an interviewer as well, if I'm understanding the question, I may not be understanding the question correctly, so I apologize. And please chat back in if I'm misinterpreting that. It depends on who the interviewer is. If you are interviewing with the manager, then I think your answers have to be in the context of what that relationship is going to be like. So you can say, I'm going to contribute to your team in this way. This is how I'm going to enable your success. This is what I'm going to add to the team. When it comes to a peer, the context of the question are, these are the things that we can do together. These are the strengths that I'm going to complement yours are. You can say, what are you good at? Maybe I can help fill in the blanks there. Pam, read the question to me one more time. I want to make sure I'm really comprehending it.
I think, well, to my understanding, I think you are as well. Would it be better to treat the interviewer as a peer or a superior?
Okay. I'll add on to that, which is, I think there is a general, no matter who you're interviewing with, there's a general level of respect and kindness. I mean, again, this may sound like common sense, but there is a general level of respect. Like for me, if I'm interviewing with someone who is several, kind of higher up in the food chain, I wouldn't refer to them as Mr. and Mrs. That is just an outdated concept. Treat them all as equal human beings. These are, yes, there are subordinate, superior relationships. There are hierarchical relationships in the workplace, but in the context of this, of an interview, you are all colleagues. And I don't think anyone is expecting a certain amount of reverence beyond basic respect and kindness.
All right, thanks. All right, here's one in regards to the thank you note. Would you like, what do you like to see in a thank you note content-wise? And do you feel it's better to send typed and or handwritten, or do you really prefer an email?
Okay, this was also something I really wish it made it to my presentation, but it just didn't make the cut. The thank you, I have an opinion about this, but this is one of those things where there definitely are mixed opinions. A thank you note is good. I prefer email personally. Handwritten is good. It doesn't make that much more of an impression on me. Just email is just efficient and it's realistic about how we communicate. I'll start with what I don't want to see, which is someone just summarizing their qualifications. Again, like going back to the tell me about yourself question. I don't want you to summarize your resume. I heard that. Instead, what I want to hear is, and I want you to use, if you're not the best writer, that's okay. You can, I have confidence that you can do this. I want the language to come across as natural and friendly as possible, not stiff and awkward. I see that a lot in thank you letters. It kind of goes hand in hand with they're just starting to summarize their qualifications. Just a natural, friendly tone. If you had a natural, friendly conversation and want to see that come through, what I want to see is tell me what you learned about the job that you didn't know walking into it. And therefore you are interested in this, you're excited about that. There's much more substance to that. And it told me that you walked away thinking critically about the job and you are going to continue thinking critically about it as you go along. Just don't regurgitate things that I already know. Just tell me, what'd you think? What'd you think coming out of the interview?
That's really good. All right, we have a couple more about thank you follow-ups, but I think you covered it there. All right, we have Paulina says, hi, Anthony. First of all, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. How should candidates handle following up after the thank you if you haven't heard back in, say, 2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, and that's where I touched on this a little bit before. It really is a judgment call. All I could give you is my opinion, which is 2 weeks tends to be the rule of thumb. And the only thing I can say with confidence is that the recruiter, if you are working with a recruiter, is the right person to follow up with. If you're in an organization that doesn't have some person who is managing that process, like school districts, for example, there's some sort of centralized personnel office. If there isn't that person who isn't the hiring manager, honestly, it's a judgment call. I think you may want to get the opinion of someone who is used to that situation. What is the proper type of follow-up? I could just tell you, in a company as big as mine, there's kind of a cultural norm that you don't poke the hiring manager about that. It just comes across as, again, you're kind of circumventing the process. And you kind of have to, as I said, respect the process that the recruiter is going to be the one communicating with you. That's your interface between the interviewers and the candidate.
All right, it looks like we do have one more question. In your experience, such as at J&J, at what stage of the interview process did you ask about salary and benefits?
I will be honest with you. I have never proactively asked about it. Some people may have a little more courage than I do. And this is me as a person. I'm what I call a process truster. That if things are meant to be, and I am going to make my way through the process, and I do get the offer, that's when I learn about the salary. Again, this will come from the recruiter. That's when I learn about the salary. That's when I learn about the benefits. And now it's time to negotiate. So you kind of have to make a judgment call. The more experience you get, you can kind of guess what the pay is. This is where online research helps, and talking to someone who works not even necessarily at the company, but who works in a similar field. They can give you a sense of what that range is, and maybe that gives you a little bit of confidence to move forward. But me personally, I never proactively ask, because it's only going to be relevant when I get the offer. And then it's important for everyone to know what those numbers are, because that's the negotiating phase. Again, if you have the courage, all I recommend is don't do it early. If there's some later conversation you have, like, let's say you're 4 steps into the process and you get a call from the recruiter, just thinking out loud here, maybe you're 4 steps into the process, there's some sort of bottleneck with the interviewer, with the interview team, someone's out on leave or something like that, and the recruiter gives you a call and says, we're on pause with this right now, we haven't heard from it. Yeah, anything, yeah. Maybe that's a good idea to say, I'm looking at other opportunities right now. I'm still really interested in this, but, and be honest about this. I'm further along in the process. I think it may come down to what the package is. Can you give me a sense of what it is? And either they're gonna say yes, they're probably gonna say no, but in case they are comfortable sharing with that, I think that's a fair opportunity to say it. I just don't think there's many opportunities to bring that up without, I keep coming back to the phrase, really respecting what the interview process is. It's all going to depend on the culture of the organization. Could depend on the personnel of the interviewers. I can only speak from my experience and my expectations.
All right, and we did a question. Can you speak to ageism, as many of us are laid off or furloughed with COVID-19?
Ageism is bad. I will share an anecdote, a mistake I made. And it was a mistake I made as a candidate, not an interviewer. Way, way early on. This is when I was trying to transition from teaching to the corporate world. I was trying to do something with my journalism degree. I was trying to get back into the news business. And I made a comment to, I forget who it was in the interview process, but I was trying to illustrate the idea that I was skilled for someone who didn't have my experience. And I said, I'm only blah, blah, blah years old. You know, and I've done this, this, and this. And she said, word of advice, don't talk about your age. I said, ooh, okay. I didn't get the job. I don't know if it was just that or that was a mistake. When I just described that situation, I use the word that you should use, which is experience. Don't talk about your age, talk about your experience. Likewise, as an interviewer, I really think we've all come to appreciate and know this by now. You cannot ask about a person's age. You can't ask about their marital status. You can't ask about their family situation. You can't ask about disabilities. There's laws around that, lots of laws around that. The other thing to keep in mind is, and to be aware of, is a lot of people are, I don't do this, but a lot of people are reluctant, and they just don't put the years that they graduated from college and the years that they worked. Instead, they put what college they went to, and they tell their degree, and then they say they had X years experience at this job, X years experience this job. If you are an older candidate, I'll say in the context of this, we can talk about age. I think you can do that. I see that from candidates of all ages. Younger people like to do that, but I can just also kind of add up your experience, and I can tell, just how much you have exactly. But that's a really simple technique to try to get around that if you are a candidate who is concerned with that.
All right, great, thank you. And we are past 1:30 here, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And it looks like we've kind of come to an end with our questions anyway. So all great questions. Thank you for submitting them. And of course, thank you all for being on with us today. Anthony, a big thank you to you for speaking to us all and giving great advice and some really thoughtful things to think about when, moving forward in some of these processes. So thank you. And
thank you.
Join us if you wish for our future webinars, which will be on Thursdays throughout the month of May, and you can find them on the alumni website, again, under the events tab and under webinars. So everyone have a great day. Anthony, again, thank you, and take care. Stay safe.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye.